Hello, everybody, and welcome to Know Your Shit podcast, where our knowledge and pride in what we do drives us to be excellent. My name is Josh Cadillac, and once again, I'll be in the driver's seat for today's show as we learn how to stop chasing paychecks and learning how to start closing customers for life. And we do that by talking to some of the most successful, smart, brilliant, awesome people in their fields to see how they became successful, how they built a business that has put them in a place where they're getting invited on podcasts. We have a great show for you today because I have a great guest. And our guest today is Mr. Joe Brady. Joe, thanks so much for being with us.
Josh, how are you? Good to be here.
Doing great. Doing great. So, Joe, why don't you tell everybody listening what it is you do?
Sure. I am an author, speaker, advisor, and a real estate developer and investor. I come at this having sat at every seat at the table in and around retail real estate, from principal, actual tenant to advisor, broker, developer. And part of my journey was working for Walgreens as the head of real estate. So I was able to captain that ship of 150 million square feet, 9,000 stores. And I really got to see a lot of big numbers working there. And it was quite interesting because that happened, Josh, really toward the fundamental shift of how retail went from demonstrably brick and mortar focus to what we call hybrid retail or omni-channel retail. So it was really fun to be in the front row for all of that.
No, I'm sure. I mean, there really hadn't been a seismic shift in how we did business in a really long time. I mean, there were shops, and that's where you went to get stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe more transportation allowed for more national brands and things like this to become a thing. Hundreds of years ago with the railroads and things like that. Mm-hmm. But by and large, you didn't have those major changes. And I mean, I think that's probably the reason why, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you had so many of these brands that have been around for very long periods of time that stuck around, the Macy's of the world and things like that.
Yeah, and the catalyst was completely tied to the acceleration in technology. And we've really seen this massive acceleration. There's something in engineering called Moore's Law. And it was coined, if you're familiar with it, your listeners are hopefully familiar, but coined by Gordon Moore, who was one of the co-founders of Intel. And he claimed that every 18 to 24 months, the power in an integrated circuit would double and the cost would be cut in half. Well, he started in 1964. And so by the time you get to the year 2000, by the time you get to 2010, you start seeing this extraordinary acceleration in what we can experience from a technology perspective. So much so that even in 2023, in April of 23, NVIDIA was worth $1 trillion. By July of that year, they were worth $2 trillion. And by September of 2023, they were worth $3 trillion. I mean, we haven't ever seen that before. So pretty amazing.
It is. And what's amazing is how that pattern of we've never seen that before is something that continues to happen, right? Just when you think you've seen it all, wait a minute. I remember I was around for the beginning with the internet stocks. My father was a big investor in the early days of all the internet stocks. And, valuations like this, they're losing money. How can these valuations make no sense? Of the world going to end? And I mean, for a little while there in the late 90s, early 2000s, the world did end for a lot of that stuff. I mean, that was a winter in those technologies that was really unprecedented. But then again, so was the growth was unprecedented. So we were just dealing in this territory that nobody had been in. And that's one of the cool parts I think about real estate is that we have this big, beautiful, long history of our product that we can kind of go to kind of know how things are going to shake out. But even we get and deal with this stuff when something unprecedented like the internet comes in and changes the way people buy things, and that has to work its way and ripple its way through our market. And but I mean, I think the thing that's interesting is that this internet thing has been around so long, and yet we're still dealing with the fallout of the change in how people shop and the choices they make with their dollars and with their feet.
Yeah, it's so true. You know, it it reminds me of how we got here, right? And we started building malls in the '60s, and right, those were the places to go. We got to remember, post World War II, all the GIs came home, everybody had kids, the baby boomer situation, the generation exploded. We had cars, right? We were moving from city out to suburb, and you had these department stores which relied on having consumer electronics and clothing and all sorts of categories were starting to get decomposed into their own separate junior anchor boxes, right? The category killers came. So we kept seeing all of this, and everything was happening sort of, in relative real time, until we started seeing whether it was the internet and now this AI revolution and how it's changing how people can spend their money. And so uh, the thing I always talk about, Josh, is the frequency or the duration of real estate, right? So if you build an office building, our goal always was let's sign a 10-year lease and we'll walk away, go play golf, or go build another one, and right. So now you have these 10-year leases. But what's happened is, and that's okay if you're an investor and you're the owner or developer, but if you're the occupier, think about the frequency in which your business is changing.
Yeah.
Can you actually guess or project what your business is going to be in 2 or 3 years if you're in tech or if you're in biotech or if you're doing any of these other, I would say, technologically enriched businesses? It is really, really difficult. And so what we've seen, and you talk about know your stuff, know your shit, and that's important. But having situational awareness to say, um, we might be selling a product, i.e., a 10-year lease, but there are not a ton of people buying that. Because if you think about the world from a consumer perspective, what is it that these occupiers need? And we're kind of switching back and forth between office and retail, but I think they're both inextricably tied in that. And in my book Workshop, I talk about how we have this consumer primacy that's happened, right? And so failure to really understand who your consumer is and the fact that their behavior is changing, they have more agency, they have more autonomy, they have more optionality. And if you're not offering choices for them, they're going to vote and go somewhere else. And that's why we just saw the last Kmart in the world close last year. And that's why we're seeing, B and C office buildings in New York City, have existential threats because they're just not relevant. And that's not to say office is dead. It's so funny. I feel like I saw this movie before, living through the retail apocalypse,
Yeah.
where no one was ever going to go to a retail store again. You remember that?
I do.
Which and it was just fundamentally wrong, and it made for good headlines and clickbait, but it was fundamentally wrong. It was reductive. It was pretty simple to try to distill down what was happening into a little silver bullet, but it's certainly not the case. And likewise, this notion that office is dead is incorrect. By the way, dirty little secret, even pre-COVID, I would say occupancy levels, weekly occupancy levels in office space were probably still in the 60s. 60%. So we were never 100% in the office.
Yeah,
So there's an awful lot there, but having that situational awareness, if you're involved in commercial real estate, is vitally important to. I keep coming back to this idea of really, know the consumer, study the consumer, and listen to the consumer because things continue to change.
absolutely. Their business. I mean, as I was struck actually at the beginning of what you were saying, like you have this bell curve, right? That they're dealing with, and that's kind of their business model. Well, like over the course of the next 10 years, we think we're going to. The highest likelihood is we're going to be here, and so that's why we're doing this 10-year lease for this size space, right? And then there is the chance. Well, I mean, on the edges, there's the chance. I guess we could go out of business, or that we could need way more space. But they were like on the outliers, and that bell curve is sort of flattened down almost into more of a dog bone situation, where you have the odds
I
of you
like that.
in the next 10 years is way higher. And the odds that you need fantastically more space because your business has done very well is higher. So like, and the middle here kind of has shrunk. So it's hard to plan 10 years. I mean, for me, I'm thinking about my businesses. I signed
Right.
3-year leases. I mean, because like, and even at the 3 years, I'm in a space right now that's different than what I need right now. And it has been for like the last year and a half because things have changed. And so we've been sort of band-aiding our way through to be where the business is going to be. And it's not a failure to plan. It's just sometimes the market, here's the crazy thing, right? No matter how well you plan, the market has got something to say about your plans. And so
Yes,
you're
exactly.
always the one that's going to take and pivot to that. And so
Mhm.
yeah, no, as the one of the things I always talk about when I talk about contracts, I teach contracts. I say, and in a contract, in any negotiation, right? There's risk and there's price. And those two
Mhm.
things are inverse. If you increase the risk, you have to compensate someone for increasing the risk. So if the buyer is going to accept a higher risk, well, then we've got to give them a better price to take and encourage them to take that risk.
Exactly.
If, if I'm the investor, yeah, those 10-year leases would be wonderful. It reduces risk on my end of needing to reoccupy the space and all this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But because there's limited demand for that, I'm going to have to offer better terms, which means I'm not going to be making the return I otherwise could. And, maybe offering a product that's a little bit more favorably seen by the market and having investors, the 10 doctors that pool their money together to take down a medical office
Right.
building, that they're going to occupy, 10% of it and rent out the other 90%. Well,
Mhm.
they care about their golf score more than they care about uh, managing that building maybe as efficiently as it needs to be. And for them, maybe that's something they're okay with. And that's kind of what
Mhm.
leading to that part that you're getting to, knowing the individual investor and what they care about. Do you want to be driving a Ferrari or do you want to be driving
Mhm.
a big SUV? Because there's different ways we can make this perform that maybe is comfortable versus maximum
Mhm.
yield. I think it's a great conversation. Frankly, I love it. That conversation is one I love more than anything with the customers because so many of my colleagues don't have that conversation. And it's one that the customer values a whole lot because it shows them you're paying attention to stuff that if they haven't thought about, that they should be thinking about, and that you care about that. I think that there's a lot of tremendous value in that, in the customer agent relationship.
And Josh, the more I think about these changes, we've seen where uh, that that monomaniacal focus on a sector, particularly in some what I'll call uh, central business districts, so urban centers that are historically reliant on suburban mass transit, right? So mostly northern cities. So whether it's New York, it's Philadelphia, D.C., Chicago, and then even out in the West Coast, if you go to San Francisco, what we've seen or what was built in these central business districts have really been in monolithic when it comes to sector, right? It's been predominantly office. And what the consumer, furthermore, has been telling us is we like a healthy ecosystem. We like live, work, play. And so there are places like Chicago. Now, I lived in Chicago for 30 years. I know the city like the back of my hand. Love the city, but wouldn't even think about buying an office building in the Loop right now.
Mhm.
Google took over the Thompson Center, the State of Illinois Center, and they're redoing that. They could be an anchor that could help change things, but the city of Chicago is not going to solve their problems by converting 100-year-old office buildings into residential, right?
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. Now, there's a really interesting example, though, of success happening in Chicago. And for your listeners, if you're familiar with the Fulton Market area, so rather than being in the downtown, which is traditionally called the Loop, you go about a mile and a half, 2 miles to the west, and it is in an area that traditionally was the warehouse district. And so you had meat packers, you had fruit, fishmongers, and all those things. And it was the cool place to live when those buildings were converted into residential. And then restaurants followed. So it was a cool place to hang out at night. And then Google happened. Google came in and they anchored what has now become this really interesting tech corridor that's happened, and many other companies have followed suit. So now, instead of the CBD, Central Business District, that is the Loop, what we're seeing now in Fulton Market is a BBD, a Better Business District. That is a healthy ecosystem with live, work, play. So some of the coolest restaurants are there. McDonald's moved their world headquarters to this area, and they took over what was Oprah Studios, it was Harpo Studios, which is Oprah spelled backwards, which is where Oprah filmed her show for so many years. So when I was at Walgreens, we built a Walgreens inside the new McDonald's headquarters there, and so very bullish on the area. The area continues to do well, but I think there's a requirement for real estate executives who are civic leaders who are thinking about how to build their communities and build more healthy communities, is to really think about that integration. How do I make this a 7-day a week community? Because otherwise, it's really tough if you're a retailer. I don't care if you're a national retailer with deep pockets or if you're a mom and pop that's scraping by. No one can exist on 2.5 days of daytime population as a retail, right? So we need to have this 7-day a week, and I think that's a really important subject when we're talking about our communities and gauging the health of the communities, and then figuring out ways how to really energize those communities.
Got it. No, that's great stuff. It's a great point to make. Let me ask you this, Joe. What do you like best about what you do,
I'm at a point in my life where, and I'm really lucky because I've done the corporate thing, I've done the entrepreneurial thing. I'm now back squarely in the entrepreneurial world. I serve on my fraternity's board of directors. I'm currently the national president of Pi Kappa Phi. I've got 11,000 undergrads, 125,000 living alumni. I'm very, very concerned about young men's mental health as we see these epidemics of loneliness, depression, anxiety, self harm, non accidental death. Many people like to blame it on uh, technology, in that everyone's head down and scrolling. but uh, I've learned that it's less about the technology and it's more about lack of purpose that a lot of
Absolutely,
young people have. And so,
absolutely.
one of the biggest things we do with Pi Kappa Phi National Fraternity is we have our own philanthropy called the Ability Experience. We're the only fraternity with our own philanthropy. We raise the students raise over $1 million a year, and they raise money for people with disabilities. So it's raising funds, but also engaging with people with disabilities. So it's servant leadership. It is everything from going out and building a ramp for a neighbor in the community who's wheelchair bound. To we've got teams that ride bicycles from coast to coast in the summer, 4,000 miles, raising money. So it's service over self, and college kids are programmed to make mistakes, and our job as elders is to put the bumper guards up and let them bounce between, and so that's part of my mission, and I'm able to do all of that, and I love that it's all thread together under this banner of building healthy communities, because we got to build really important real estate that services the consumer, and we've got to preach about it a bit, write books, talk to Josh, and then be a net giver. I always talk about that in term. I've been on a bunch of non-for-profit boards, and that means you pay to be on there. That means you bring your time and your treasure and your skills, but you know, in every single instance, there's been a benefit to me and my family. So, but be a net giver. And I think that's a really important message.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. The ability to make is one thing, but what you do with what you make is such an important part of
Right.
a life well lived and doing this thing well. I very much lean into what you're talking about, that idea of guys being in trouble. Right, I read a book years ago
Yeah.
called Boys Adrift, written by a
Yeah.
child psychologist, Leonard Sachs. Such a good book talking about that lack of purpose. Another great one was a book called Wild at Heart. Another great book talking
Mm.
about men and how men, um, and caveat with Wild at Heart is a bit of a religious book, but done really really well, and it's talking about what the heart of a man is designed to
Mm.
sort of do. And I've said it on this podcast a few times, but because it's something you talk about, I'll tell you, there's one line in the book that I never forget, which is that every man in his heart wants to be William Wallace, wants to be a
Mm.
guy that, they're tearing your guts out and you hold till the bitter end. They're tearing you apart, but you're going to hold. And every man in
Right.
his heart fears that he's the Bruce, that he's the guy that said he was going to show up. And when I read that, it resonated because there's this constant that goes on within us of proving ourselves to ourselves. And as you start to pick up the the frost on the tips over here, you start to
Hmm.
get the gray hairs. You've proved over the
Yep.
course of, like, I know who this guy is. I know when this guy will show up, and I know when, and you develop that sort of self respect. And when you're young, there's really not a lot of proving grounds for this thing. And so, I think a lot of our guys run to things like video games where, there is a way to tally up, hey, how am I doing on the score? Where I'm needed. Hey, look, you're the best tank we have. We need you tonight at
Right.
11 to run. There's somebody's going to sit there and say, we can't do this without you. And as a man, frankly, that's one of the things I think most of us live for. Somebody to look you in the eyes and say, well, thank God you're here. We couldn't do it without you, is something that to
Right.
be needed like that speaks very deeply to the core of, seems like, how many guys are wired. And so our culture really doesn't leave a lot of those opportunities. They're told constantly as guys, um, we don't need you. Whatever guys can do, girls can do, and girls can do it better. And so they kind of had their real estate that they used to stand on. It's not that I'm looking to take and reduce opportunities to women. I'm glad women can do everything they do and whatever. Um, it's just guys haven't really figured out where their purpose is going to come from if they're not needed as much. I think
Yeah.
that's part.
And that there's been a number of other books, kind of continuing. Hopefully, if your readers are keeping track, there's one called of Boys and Men, Richard Reeves, and then Jonathan Haidt from NYU has been doing some really interesting work around the coddling of the American mind and the
Love that
anxious
book.
generation, right? And so,
Great book.
but I'll tell you, if you're familiar with, and I know we're deviating a little bit from real estate here, but
Oh,
again,
we're all over
it's
the place. It's all good.
I love it. But Arthur C. Brooks, who is the most popular professor at Harvard Business School, teaches a course called The Art and Science of Happiness. And he
Mhm.
just recently wrote a book called Build a Better Life. And The Art and Science of Happiness, he co wrote it with Oprah Winfrey, as a matter of fact. And when I read the book, he talked about uh, the fact that for the most part, we live in a break fix economy, in a break fix medical world, right? Particularly for our bodies, right? The insurance company's not going to pay Josh for you to go and work out at a gym, right? That would make too much sense. They're going to wait
Yeah.
until you get injured and then you can go see a doctor and then they'll pay. Break fix. And what we're seeing, but at least there are gyms where we could go and work out our bodies. There really aren't opportunities for us to work out our minds and to build resilience and to understand that life is hard and there will be struggles. And how do we get our young people to be more resilient? And so Arthur Brooks talks about this in terms of neuroscience and his ideas. So his approach is really couched in science, which I appreciate. And I actually reached out to him, and we're starting to work with him as part of this fraternity's member education, which most people know it as pledging, but it's the member education program that we're starting to use his modules for these undergrads so they can start working their brains out, so they can understand, when you're depressed, the best thing you can do is go and help somebody else who's depressed,
Yeah.
right? And there are these hooks and these that no one tells you about, that can help and lead to uh, better health. And so if people are healthier, they're more productive, they're out there. We're the most industrious, entrepreneurial, creative country in the world. How do we keep our competitive edge? Because today, and I see this a lot with undergraduate kids, we've gone from a period of helicopter parents to snowplow parents, where these parents are literally just getting every problem, every struggle, every little issue out of their kids' way, and they don't realize what a disservice they're doing. So,
Absolutely.
why is this important to me? Well, I'm very interested in office real estate. I'm very interested in corporates, and these are the people who are going to be working for us. This is the workforce. This is the consumer base that's going to be spending their money and working in our offices in a very short time. So again, I wanted to bring it back to know your shit and situational awareness. But we have this responsibility to think about our communities in a multidimensional sense.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I mean, you're anticipating who your customer is going to be based upon where society is moving. You don't want to be where it was. You don't even want to be where it is. You want to be where it's going to go because that's where the opportunity is. It's not identified yet. If I can identify this opportunity, I can get in now and experience the benefit of being where the need is going to be. It's basic business. Great businesses always anticipate the customer. They're out in front of that. And so I love that. Where do you think, Joe, if you had to put a fine point on it or track it back to a thing, what would you say? Where do you think all the success came from for you?
It's very simple. I've collected people. There's a fallacy, and I'm actually advising my 24-year-old daughter who's just about to get her master's degree. I'm advising her that she should be open to introductions and getting help, and particularly from her dear old dad. And what I've realized is no one is self-made. all of us are really a collection of the relationships and experiences, the acts of kindness that others have bestowed on us. I wouldn't be where I am today, having started and sold several businesses, having led one of the biggest real estate departments, run the biggest real estate department, in retail. I wouldn't have accomplished those things had I not had this vast network of people who have impacted my life, and I've impacted theirs. But my job now, as a silverback, is to be more mentor than mentee. But I'm still mentored. I still talk to my first boss, who is 94 years old, Derwin Owen, and listen to him, and he has wisdom. And so it has to go two ways. There's some caveats of which, and I'm sure you're like this as well, Josh, but there's no job I won't do, right? Like, I'll sweep the floors, I'll do whatever it takes. And I think there's a fallacy. I experienced it coming out of business school way back when, that I now have this MBA and I just spent 2 years doing case studies as if I'm the CEO and the decision maker. Well, you come out knowing the square root of like nothing, and so it's important for you to know that you're going to have to fetch coffee, or take notes, or carry someone's bag, or be humble, do what needs to be done, and persevere. It's vitally important.
Absolutely. When you were talking about resilience and all this kind of stuff, I think back, and I don't know if you've played sports, but I've worked for years. I've played sports and worked, and there have been jobs that I've gotten where it's like, get this done, and it is
Yeah.
just so big and so insurmountable. But there's a point at which you just zone out. You go to this other place where you
Mm-hmm.
just put your head down and keep going. Like, you're going to run around the field 50 times, and you're on five and you're dying. So what do? You go someplace else and you just keep going. And then but then when you've finished lap 50, you're like, holy crap! I just did that 50 times. Like, I know that if somebody said do this
Yeah.
50 times, I'm the kind of guy that could do this. I didn't know before I started, but because I did it 50 times, I now know I'm in that group of people that could do this 50 times. Um, and when people take that away from you, when it gets hard, you really don't know what you're working with when it comes to
Mm.
yourself. You haven't, I say all the time, you have to define yourself to yourself. You're learning. When you're young, you're learning what you got to work with. And, like, if you're a high type A, high performer, you're getting honor rolls and stuff like that. So there's ways for you to establish, yeah, I work harder than everybody. But if you're kind of like more normal in the middle, the places for you to take and build that in, and especially when your parents are there, as you said, snow plowing it all out of the way. There's just
Yeah.
so fewer places for you to establish that. The crazy thing is, right? Everybody has all this self-esteem right now, but very little
Mm-hmm.
self-respect, because they don't
Mm-hmm.
have anything they're really worth respecting. They've been told they're perfect and wonderful the way that they are, and we all kind of know it's not true. But you believe a lie long enough, you hear it loud enough, eventually, you start living that way. And we have a nation full of narcissists, sadly, who, it's one thing to love yourself if, if you've got something there
Right.
worth.
Learning is not this incremental, straight line. And the author Eric Asimov has a great quote. He said, um, uh, the future, in the future, the illiterate people will not be the ones who can't read and write. They will be the ones who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's vitally important. And so I just did my first triathlon last fall. I rode a
Congrats.
bike 1,000 miles from Miami to Tallahassee and raced 250,000 miles with a team of 36 guys from the fraternity in May. We did it in 2 weeks. I never thought I'd ride a bike 1,000 miles in 2 weeks. This guy. And by the way, there are hills in Florida. We found them. Uh,
Yeah, there aren't
so,
many, but you would have absolutely.
yeah.
Mount Dora section there is not flat. Uh,
Yes, Orlando to Ocala. Yeah, yeah, for
as the
sure.
dog says, rough. Yeah, a little bit. Let me ask you this, Joe. I'd like you to kind of take a step back and assess, pop yourself out right here, take a look down at Joe. What do you think in your makeup, in the way you came from the factory, and the kind of person you are? What do you think is what makes you good at this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I blame my parents, and definitely,
This is their fault.
it, it is their fault. Not only is it genetics, but I think it was the intellectual curiosity of my father, who was an engineer, and the heart of my mother, who's a saint. They're still, they're doing well in their mid 80s, and it's great to have them. And
Awesome.
but I just still think, I'm 60 years old, and I talk to my parents. I ask my mom questions. Now I'm asking her more questions about how she's doing, and but at the end of the day, I think you have to have that home base, and it can be your biological parents, it can be your loving parents, it can be you know, and I think from there, having that basis, you start making life decisions, and the most important decision that most of us ever make is who is our mate, and so at the end of the day, my best decision ever was marrying my wife Shannon. And so uh, it comes to relationships, and it goes back to what you asked earlier, Josh, which is okay. How do you get success? And it's really collecting people. It's having the right people in your life, and if you have toxic people, shit can them
Yeah, you're
as
gonna.
quickly as possible.
Yep. No, that makes sense. You got to have the good
Yeah,
ones because, I mean, the difference between making it and not making it, making the choice to get off the couch and go back in the office and work on that project that you have in the back burner. You got the wrong people. No, man, stay. Let's goof off a little bit longer. As
yeah,
opposed to, man, you got that thing going. When is that going to get done? You need to get your butt in there and do that. The difference just it's so little the amount that it takes to shift you from one track to the other, but that slight deviation over the course of miles has you in radically different places, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And so yeah, man, I could not agree more. You need people that are throwing coal into the burners, rather
yeah.
folks that are you know cooling the flame off, throwing water in.
Yeah, exactly. Love that analogy.
So I'm glad it worked, dude, because I totally made it up on the fly. That was
Well played. That's where most genius comes from, right? Poof.
honestly a lot of bad choices too, probably along the way. But uh, Joe, a similar question, a little bit, but and these are designed to be a little bit on the personal side. But how do you manage yourself when things don't go well? Unmet expectations. You put everything together. You do all things right, and life comes back and kicks you in the teeth. I mean, I'm dealing with our listeners are a lot of entrepreneurs in real estate. There are a lot of agents that they're their own boss. And the thing with real estate that they don't tell you on the real estate exam or anything like that is you get kicked in the teeth a lot. You work with a customer for months and years. I'm dealing with one right now, and they changed agents arbitrarily for no good reason after years of helping this lady
Mm.
get her house cleaned out and everything. And it happens. How do you deal with you?
So there's a couple of things. I try to remember that old adage: get knocked down 9 times, get up 10. Um, uh, I do come from a sports background. I played Division I soccer. 90 minutes on the pitch. Things don't always go well, but you have to get up and keep getting at it. In my current uh, current professional life, I really rely on gratitude, and it's easy to say now on a podcast, but and there's probably times where you yell, kick, and scream, you get it out, but then we are undoubtedly our own worst critics, and if you actually amplified that internal voice of the things we say to ourselves, and other people listen, they would think you're a psychopath, right? So we got to be kind to ourselves. We have to give ourselves a break. We have to realize we're not going to bat 1,000. Stuff's going to go wrong. By the way, we're not in control of everything. But at the end of the day, when you take stock of what you have completed, what you have achieved, and you think about uh, those achievements and have some gratitude and thanks, because again, it wasn't all skill. There's a lot of luck involved as well. And so if you're getting good luck, Fortuna will absolutely at some point come back and smack you in the head with some bad luck. And so, you know, it's putting it in perspective and playing the long game, right? I've fallen victim to these short term episodes that I thought were catastrophic, and you know, and even now, some things can come up where you're just like, oh no, everything's gonna go to hell in the handbasket. But you take stock and you realize, okay, up until now, I have survived 100% of all of the bad things that have ever happened to me. And so, therefore, I'm going to continue surviving until I don't, at which point I won't care because I'll be gone. So,
The visual evidence would seem to imply that I'm a survivor to this point. Yeah, no,
right?
I
Yeah.
agree with that for sure. So, what do you see, Joe? If you were to talk about what do you see as the opportunity in the market today? What's the thing that's got you excited?
Understand the psychographics and demographics and the trends that are happening. Are you embracing data? Are you processing that data? Are you engaging in the industry? Are you talking with other industry players? When my wife and I moved to Florida 4 years ago from Chicago, we looked all over the state and we settled in the Jacksonville area because I thought it delivered for me everything I needed. I wanted to move to Florida. I wanted to be able to get in a car and drive to see my parents or in Sanibel. I wanted an airport because I was flying quite a bit internationally and domestically. Jax has a great airport. Needed health care. There's a Mayo Clinic 6 miles from my house. And we needed a Whole Foods, according to the CEO of our household. So we have that very close by. And oh, by the way, price per square foot in and around the Jacksonville area compared to the rest of the state, and was highly competitive. And we live in an area called Ponte Vedra Beach, which is home to TPC Sawgrass, the PGA Tour. So, sort of upscale community. But even since we moved in 4 years ago, we've seen an unbelievable appreciation in our housing. And so, I think the key if you're in real estate is doing your homework and really, I am pandering here, knowing your shit, but B, then synthesizing it. In other words, where's the arbitrage? Where's the unpriced trend? How do I win here? How can my clients and customers win?
Where's the market opportunity? I always tell my agents, if you can take a news story and turn that into a real estate recommendation, you're doing the right thing, because you're talking about this just happened. It's going to ripple. Here's where the ripples end up. Here's where the opportunity manifests itself. So I love that unpriced trend. I may start using that some in my talks, because I love that term.
By all means.
It's a good polished professional way of referring to this idea of finding where the opportunity is going to manifest itself.
Sure.
So good
Yeah.
stuff. Well, we didn't. We briefly touched on your book a little bit, and what that's about. So, if you could tell us, what was the reason for writing, and what were you looking to do with it?
Well, I had this one of those awakenings that I had seen this movie already when the office industry was starting to go into the doldrums during the pandemic, and I saw what happened in retail. I thought the office industry is having a retail moment. I've always been interested in history and technology, and I really cobbled it together by starting with the thesis that accelerating technology was changing consumer behavior and having a profound impact on the built environment. And so I wanted to explore that, so I did that in my book, Work Shop. And, the cover's kind of cool. It's all about coffee, right? So one cup is to go. That's the shop side. The other's a ceramic mug, welded together. And so really the subtitle is The Consumer-Driven Transformation of Commercial Real Estate. And while I don't have a ton of answers in the book, I raise a lot of questions for people to think about. And again, everyone's getting lost in the noise. No one's focused on the signal when it comes to this whole return to office mandate. And office, all of these real estate sectors are interchangeable. So your residential agents certainly need to understand where the retail is for folks, and also where the quote work is, where the offices are, and so this whole interchangeable approach has dramatically impacted retail first, and now it's happening in office, and for office, and this goes to your I would say your residential experience as well. We need to be curating experiences for our clients. In the office space, office buildings are no longer just these monolithic temples to what was. They're actually now more focused on a dynamic, agile, flexible, and scalable hospitality environment, right? I mean, whether you're an office building owner, or whether you're JP Morgan, or any of the Fortune 500, you're thinking about how to deploy workspace. And it's not just about setting up a cubicle farm and saying, there's your cubicle, go and work and get your job done, right? It's literally about providing the leadership, not management, of bringing folks into the office. It's about focusing on the right metrics. Is what you're doing, and again, I couch all this in whether or not you're working in what I call the new collar economy, or the information economy, technology-based economy. Is what you're doing contributing to the bottom line of the business? In other words, are you being effective? Because we still hear the P word, productivity, And, I could be reporting to you, Josh, and I could say, hey, Josh, I sent 100 emails this morning, man. I have been productive. Now, those could be 100 emails to the wrong people. And if they don't result in anything, do you care? Like, do I put any points on the board? No. But if I said, hey, Josh, I went to breakfast this morning because work just doesn't happen inside an office. Work and office are now officially decoupled. There are times where you will go to an office, to a workspace, and work. But back to my analogy, if I go to a breakfast with a potential client and land them, and I'm residential and I have a big listing, or, I'm a consultant, I have a new client, poof, I'm playing golf that afternoon. And by the way, the enterprise and my family are all better for it. It's just that why do we work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, when that's an agrarian and an industrial era construct, right? You know, why are we holding on to that? So again, learn, unlearn, relearn. And I'm not saying, you can have a 20-hour work week, although I think there's books written about that, but maybe you can. And depending upon depending upon your role, depending upon your role within a larger company, there's some jobs that have to be, at the desk 5 days a week. Um, a surgeon has to be in the operating room. So we're not talking about medicine. We're talking about the new collar economy that blends technology enablement and technology, where we can do our job in an airport, in a hotel room. You could finish giving a speech and then get on a conference call and move the ball forward and be effective. So we just have to be cognizant of that. We have to avoid being reductive and going to a silver bullet, because one size fits one size. It doesn't fit all.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. All right, Joe. So kind of have to move to a little bit of a lightning round here to kind of get the last of
Sounds
these
good.
ideas. And this is just to kind of get people to know you a little better, because I always love them to understand the person that's talking. What would you say you're most proud of in business that you've accomplished?
Uh, I probably my most significant deal was when I was at Walgreens doing over a 200,000 square foot office deal in a building in Chicago called the Old Post Office. The building sat vacant for 30 years, and was able to lead the team that really was the first tenant into that building, which has since pretty much filled up, and it's really an important landmark for anyone that's been to Chicago and that's driven on the Eisenhower Expressway into the city of Chicago. You literally drive right under it. So that was a pretty good win.
Cool. What would you say? Similar question. Most proud of you've accomplished in life.
Grace and Joey, my kids, 24 and 23. You know, uh, am I perfect? Far from it. But I think the older they get, the smarter I'll become. But I'm proud of the humans, the people, that they are, and they're really interesting. And I think that's a cool thing to look at your kids and go, wow, these are really interesting people. I'd like to hang out with them.
That's can't beat that. What's one piece of advice? You may never speak to any of the folks that are listening here again. What one piece of advice, if you give them something, what would it be?
Um, and I say this repeatedly. I said it earlier, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating it, but it's really collect people. It's no none of us does this alone, and your success is the amalgamation of the relationships that you've made, and the people who've helped you, and those that you've helped.
Good stuff. Um, if you had to nail it down, one book, what one book, besides your own, obviously, what one book would you recommend to our listeners?
That's okay. My latest is Build the Life You Want. The Art and Science of Happiness, Arthur C. Brooks. Um, Turns out happiness is love, And so love of a higher power, love, uh, love for your family, love for serving others. This country needs a little bit. We need to love each other a little bit more.
That would be good. That would be good.
Yeah.
The idea, and this is one of the things that has irritated me in culture as there's become more and more of a component that doesn't that doesn't love the idea of the United States as much. They don't respect what went into making it. And the only way you could be a person to not love and respect something like that is because you're just never really thought about what went into the making of something like that. You haven't experienced the other thing. It's people from here that tend not to respect it. Like when I deal with the room I was in front of today was largely folks from Latin America. Man,
Mm.
they think they got the greatest thing in the world going on here. And so I think they've done a pretty good job of dividing us off the idea of this is something that's ours and that's a valuable, good thing. And when, when you when you don't think of your country as something worth saving and making better, something that's a good thing, I think that it's very easy for folks to get to this place where it's hard to talk to each other, start talking past each other.
Yeah. I grew up.
Isolating ourselves into groups like that saves us from banging heads. But anyway, favorite movie of all time.
Yeah. The Big Lebowski.
All right. Famous person in history you'd want to meet if you could.
Mahatma Gandhi.
All right, that's a good one. Person from your past you'd want to sit down with and have lunch with today if you could.
My pop, my Italian grandfather.
Love it. All right, one piece of advice you would go back and give a younger version of you.
Put the beer down.
Yeah.
Read more books.
There's so much of our life that we have to look back with regrets and say, why didn't I just? I'd be so much further along right now.
Oh, that's so true.
If you had to be stuck in a foxhole taking fire, who would you pick to have in that foxhole with you?
Huh, that's a great question. I would say my man Nestor Iliadis. Nestor was a client when he was at Walgreens and I was at JLO. When I joined Walgreens, he became my number two, indispensable. And then when I left to go to the Instant Group to lead North and South America, I brought him over as my COO. And so we've been in the foxhole. I know it works.
Yeah. No, that's what you want. Somebody you know has got your back. What do you do to unwind, Joe?
I take these little white balls and I put them into water uh,
Ah,
on a golf course. So I like to play golf. Love to exercise. But lately, it's been I'm putting less balls in water and keeping them on the green stuff.
This is good. There's the green stuff and the sandy stuff, and the sandy stuff's not as good as the green stuff. Yeah, yeah. No,
It's not bad though. The water's bad.
of the potential places to go, the wet one is the one to avoid.
I'm just about to take the snorkel out of my golf bag, but not yet.
I'm not quite ready to commit. All right, simple question. The entrepreneur question I have to always ask because there's always an answer. What's next for you? What's the next project? What's the next thing that's rolling around back here? We don't seem to be able to stop. What is it?
Yeah, I think I'm working on some really cool real estate projects. But I have another book in my head that really plays on a lot of the principles of behavioral economics. So if we believe that that we're in a period of consumer primacy, then what do we need to learn? What do we need to focus on? And there's only been 5 Nobel Prizes awarded in behavioral economics. But if anyone's ever seen the movie Moneyball or read the book, it's all about biases and heuristics and really cutting through it. And there's been some terrific work done. In fact, there's a book called Nudge by a University of Chicago professor named Richard Thaler, who was one of those that won a Nobel Prize in economics. And it's just really interesting it's a combination of psychology and economics and putting them together and creating environments. Thaler and his co-author Sunstein refer to it as choice architecture. And one of the things I talk about often is that the traditional architecture industry in the U.S. is a $45 billion industry, yet no one even knows what choice architecture is. Yet it's fundamentally important. So how can we not only build buildings, but build organizations such that we're helping people do the right thing, but they are not losing agency, autonomy, or optionality. A good example, and not to bore you, is a 401k program. So if I join your company, Josh, and you have a 401k, I have to opt out of that 401k as a decision. So I can do that, but it's set up such that coming in, I'm going to force you as a consumer to save money, which frankly we're terrible at doing and wouldn't do unless it was forced upon us. That's why banks like Bank of America had a program called Round Up. So every time you used your credit card, it rounded up to the next dollar, took that delta and put it in your savings account. So there's things like that. So I think there's a lot of really fun things to explore there.
All right, I got one last question for you, Joe. Where can people find you?
Yes. So joebrady.ai is my website. You can access Amazon via the website to buy the book. If people reach out to me who've listened to your podcast at jb at joebrady.ai, I'll be happy to send a free PDF of the book. So take advantage of that. Otherwise, LinkedIn, Joe Brady03.
Awesome. Joe, thank you so much for being on. It was great having a conversation with you, bud.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Josh. Keep doing your great work.
Well, thank you, sir. And I want to thank our listeners for hanging out with us, spending their time with us, and getting a chance to hear all the cool stuff that Joe has to say. I'm going to remind you, as I always do, there's never a good excuse not to know your shit. Till next time.